last session is the second part of the twin sessions, is expanding I-IMEC stakes and benefits, connecting the global south and the Indo-Pacific. The second part is going to be focusing on the global south. The panel is going to be moderated by James Carafano, Senior Counselor to the President and E.W. Richardson Fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
Well, this is the most important. No, really. This is the real undiscussed value of I-IMEC is not what it's going to do for all the people that already are making all the money from global trade. It's the opportunity for other countries, and in particular, I think this has enormous implications for North, West, and East Africa. We only have one African here, but so you can speak for the entire continent. That's not unusual. That happens all the freaking time. But we also have other countries which actually do business in Africa and with Africans as well, and they have their own interests as well. So I just very briefly say from an American perspective, we don't have a clear US strategy on Africa yet. But we have a lot of very interesting indicators. And I think a couple of them are, one is, and this isn't really just an Africa thing, this is this administration in general, where the code word is pragmatic. The United States is looking for pragmatic partnerships with countries on like-minded issues. So it's not about democracy promotion. It's not about exporting a political agenda. It's what do we do that makes sense for both of us, that makes life better for both of us. The other one is, if you haven't picked up on this yet, this is not an administration that is really like super enamored with foreign assistance. Not because they don't like to be generous. Actually, Donald Trump is one of the most generous human beings you'd ever want to meet. It's because it sucks. Traditional foreign aid actually delivers very little aid. Most of it never actually gets to the people who are intended for the program. We used to talk about the military-industrial complex. We should be talking about the NGO-industrial complex, which is way more insidious. And a lot of these programs don't actually have outcomes which are valued in the countries in which they're directed and which actually deliver on the outcomes that they suggest. So this administration is much more interested in foreign direct investment, partnerships, and joint opportunities. So when you hear those kinds of things, this is the definition of the I-IMEC project. So this is really tailor-made for the United States. And if I could just take 1 second for what we have been talking about is, you know, if you look at all these corridors, there isn't like a direct dotted line to the United States. And this is the entire point. Everybody thinks about corridors as about moving stuff. But corridors create synergistic growth. They create innovation hubs. They create new partnerships. They do all kinds of magical things other than moving a cargo container across them. And so what we have argued is the United States should be the world's greatest proponent for not just the 3 Cs initiative or the Middle Corridor or I-IMEC, but looking at these as one single project. Because if you do these things and this is how we're going to do global trade after globalization. And the question is, for the countries that were really left out of globalization, for countries that have rapidly growing demographics, and they need real growth in their economies, and they need jobs, and they need jobs, and they need jobs, how can they benefit from this? So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just kind of briefly introduce themselves, and we're just going to go down the road here. And I'm going to start with the question is, having had to sit around here, because you can't get away because you're the last panel, so you have to stay anyway. Let me ask you, from everything you've heard today, the question is, what is in it for you? So please just introduce yourself and answer the question. We'll just go down the line.
Okay, thank you for the chance, for the institutes who invited me to speak, and for the moderator to brief shortly what Trump 2.0 means on aid and other issues, on business. And it's my pleasure to be here. It's my second time in Europe, actually. And I have seen, observed in Europe some of the developments that not seen in Africa. Actually, it's very difficult to represent Africa as a whole. I'm Guzacho. We call by our first name in Ethiopia, and I'm a proud Ethiopian and African scholar and citizen, a young scholar, who have a BA and MA degree in Ethiopia and had PhD from India. So today, and I'm just affiliated think tank which worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's not representing the government position which I am speaking today. Today I understand this conference and my observation. There are a lot of issues which I understand from my observation. One very simple, quick understanding in my mind is an issue of the collective waste. It's an issue which I understand from the conference and how they understand connectivity as a collective waste, as a collective waste in its apart forms from the US perspective and from European perspective, and inside the European Union itself, how they understand connectivity. From Hungarian perspective is different, from the other European colleagues are different perspectives. And how we understand from African perspective also very important. Connectivity is very essential for Africa as a continent, which we envisioned to be self-reliant and to be a source of reducing, alleviating serious poverty challenges, which is very critical in supporting those poverty reduction programs in Africa through the Agenda 2063 of the African Union agenda, which is achieving prosperous Africa. And one of the issues which I understand is Ethiopia. We found in a second largest population in Africa, next to Nigeria. We had more than 120 million population sizes, maybe more. Some of the collective European countries, some of it. And we had now a growing economy in East Africa. And that needs connectivity to the sea, to the other areas in Asia, Middle East, Europe, and the West Africa countries. In Ethiopia, we open up our economy since last year. And the new government is opening up the economy. Since the last 2 weeks, the government already approved in its parliament and council of ministers about opening some of the sectors for the foreigners, including the real estate sectors, which is totally banned foreign investors to invest in Ethiopia for the last, in its history of the country. So this connectivity helps for European partners and other to enter into as a first gate to Africa through bridging the Africa, Europe, and the Middle East countries, and not competing with existing Africa initiatives and existing other global initiatives. We have to see as a supplementary rather than as a competition. If that's a competition, it will create a foreign policy dilemma and strategic confusion for the states, like not to be suffocated through these middle power competitions. Ethiopia, one of the highest investor countries from China is the first, Saudi Arabia is the second, UAE is now, and India have more than 600 companies in Ethiopia because we are the East African hub, and we have the most prestigious airlines in Africa, as most of you know. some of the connectivity is built through Djibouti, through China, the railway connectivity. So we need some complementary that connecting the Ethiopia is a landlocked country, but have an aspire and an ambition, not simple aspiration, but an interest to the sea, access to the sea. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Nurban. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Indonesian. I'm actually American. My parents are from Sri Lanka, but one of my sort of projects these days is... You are the world. Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah. I like, I'm enjoying connecting Israelis and Indonesians. I've always thought it was really important to connect the world's largest Muslim majority country and the world's only Jewish majority country. So what is in it for Indonesia? So I worked for the World Bank for about a decade in Indonesia, which is actually the largest country office outside of the DC headquarters. And one of the things I learned about infrastructure development and development financing over there was really the sort of raising of standards that comes from connectivity and infrastructure development all the way down to the subnational level. You know, when it comes to Indonesia, just a quick 101, sometimes when I come to different parts of the world and I talk about Indonesia, not everyone knows what's going on. And it is the world's third largest democracy. It is the world's fourth largest country by population. It is a G20 member state, which is, of course, one of the requirements being that it should have $1 trillion GDP. It is an OIC member state, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's an OPEC and an APEC member state as well. And of course, it's a secretariat of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So it's a pretty important rising middle power. And when we look at even the geography of it, from one end to the other end, the distance is the same as the distance from London to Afghanistan. 3 time zones. This is a pretty big country, 17,500 islands, 360 different ethnic groups, over 700 languages, and over 1,200 religions, even though it's the largest Muslim majority country. So what does this mean for I-IMEC? And what does this mean for infrastructure development as well? Well, first of all, Indonesia is multilateral to the core. As I mentioned, all these different multilateral groupings are really, really important for its sort of interests in the world, its interests in the sub-region as well, APEC, OPEC, you name it. Now, with I-IMEC, personally, I think it is critical for Indonesia to join I-IMEC. So with my apologies to India, it will be double I-IMEC, Or if we add Japan, which I also think is important, there will be a JIIMEC, something like that, ideally. How to sell Indonesia on that, and what is in it for Indonesia? First, the potential growth of new institutions. So as a G20 member state, Indonesia enjoys all the surrounding institutions around it. So for example, there's the U20, which is all the different universities which are part of those G20 member states all get to cooperate and collaborate and talk with each other in the run-up to the summit every year. There is the Y20, which is the youth. There is the Science 20, the S20, which is all the different scientists who meet up and talk and collaborate across the 20 member states. Why can't we do something like that for I-IMEC? These institutions might look different, but I think that Indonesia could benefit quite a bit from these types of institutions. Indonesia having more startups in the ASEAN region than even Singapore, why not have a startup sort of institution as well across the I-IMEC member states, including Indonesia, hopefully. But really, what I think is important as well is the fact that according to ADL surveys, 93% of Indonesians have never met a Jew. 93%. And I do think that for...
Well, it should have come to my neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely, So there needs to be more exposure. there needs to be more interaction. We need to have, what Carice and I have talked about before. We actually met on a flight. Thanks for the invitation, Carice, as well as to the Danube Institute, is we need a stable international system. And that might sound very aspirational and so forth, but when there are more people-to-people interactions across religions, faiths, worldviews, so on and so forth, that does tend to proliferate over time. That's not what I'm saying. That's what the research, the literature out there tends to demonstrate. So I do think that that is important from a business point of view, from a science diplomacy point of view, and so on and so forth. But finally, the last thing I'll say about this is, besides the fact that we might need a Google Maps for everything underground at the technical level, power, water, gas, fiber optics, you name it, internet, so on and so forth, besides that fact, there can be better technical assistance provided by countries that Indonesia is not always exposed to. That includes Israel, of course, as well. And through that technical assistance, we can reduce a lot of the problems that we see between those 17,500 islands. For example, it costs more to ship goods between Jakarta, the capital, where I tend to be based, to the opposite end in West Papua. It costs more to send a good there than it costs from Jakarta to Shanghai. So how can we reduce and improve the sort of logistics and operations of that? I'll leave that to our I-IMEC friends to figure that out. But those are some initial ideas that I think that should be taken into account if we are going to include, the world's third largest democracy in I-IMEC and improve the sort of connectivity between these different member states through maritime highways, through undersea cables, through other ways of producing better connectivity. So those are just some ideas. Thank you.
So or you just grab my. So let me throw you just a little bit of a curveball, right? So you could talk about what's good for India, but I think we all know about what's good for Indianness. But you could say that, right? But what I'm really interested in is India has partnerships throughout the Indian Ocean and across into Africa. And so what would be really interesting as well, actually for me more interesting, what is in it for India in its partnerships as a regional actor, not just through the Indian Ocean and the east coast of Africa, but also its emerging partnerships in the Middle East?
Thank you, and delighted to be here, and thank you for this invitation, Danube Institute and the Signal Group. I come from that country which somebody described this morning, the lousy democracy. You should come to India, it's hardly lousy. It's a very vibrant, noisy, difficult, chaotic democracy, so anything but lousy. Vibrant and, just too noisy sometimes. My name is Happy Mon Jacob. I teach at the university there. I'm also the founder of a think tank based out of New Delhi. I live and work in Delhi, and I have not really heard much about I-IMEC in Delhi. I mean, that's a shame. Seriously, I run a think tank. I go to pretty much every think tank discussion in Delhi, but and I think this is a place where we need a lot of honesty, right? I mean, I-IMEC 2023. Right, so it's not been really that long for us to have discussed this particular idea threadbare. So I will be honest about it. We haven't heard, there isn't much discussion in Delhi about I-IMEC, even though India may be in a pivotal sort of location when it comes to I-IMEC or the Indo-Pacific. There's a lot of conversation about the Indo-Pacific. What does India want? Right, I mean, it is the largest growing, it is what, fastest growing large economy in the world. It is 1,400 million people, $4 trillion economy, and 20% of its economy is even informal. It's not even formal economy. If you look at the Indian borders, you will see 15,000 kilometers of India's border. Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bhutan. How do you describe these countries? Not friendly at all, somewhat friendly, difficult. That is not the space that India looks at when it looks at the rest of the world, to sort of go to the rest of the world. flip the Indian map and look at the border from the Rann of Kutch southwards and to the Bay of Bengal. That's 15,000 kilometers of India's maritime borders, which is full of opportunities. That's where the Indo-Pacific comes in. So here is a country that is shedding its obsession from continental sort of thinking about its grand strategy, or shedding its continental obsession and taking to the Indo-Pacific, to the maritime space in a big way. It is a country that is shedding its fear about free trade agreements and moving fast into signing a slew of free trade agreements with EU, UK, United States, Gulf Cooperation Council, whatnot, Australia. You have several of these FTAs that are being signed. This is a country that wants a lot more market access internationally, wants to get through to the rest of the world, etc., etc. People often ask me, you're also in the Quad, you are in the SCO, you are in BRICS, you are in I-IMEC, you are in pretty much everything that happens in the world. What explains that? Well, my answer is very simple. It's a 1,400 million people country. Right. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. A 10 million country in Europe can probably do that. We simply can't do that. So I think you will find us everywhere. India is too huge. Indians are everywhere. You sort of, or Indian origin people are pretty much everywhere. You're not. So, but that's just the way, you know, the country has sort of panned out internationally. The point that I'm trying to make, and I think you made an interesting point, which is you need to have more people talking about I-IMEC. I think elite conversations about I-IMEC is important, but you need to have a lot more people in the media, in the think tank community, in the universities talk about I-IMEC. Otherwise, I'm not very confident I-IMEC is going to pick up in a big way in the years to come. I'm also not so sure at this point of time, let's say, reflecting and thinking within the strategic community in Delhi, that there is a properly thought out plan behind I-IMEC. That's a feeling one gets. It's a great idea. It's a great idea, but not all great ideas can be implemented, are thought out properly for implementation. So is there a grand strategy behind I-IMEC? And I'm saying all of this with all honesty because I come from a country which I think is pivotal to both the Indo-Pacific and I-IMEC. Even on the Indo-Pacific, there's a lot of lack of clarity in India. India does not have an Indo-Pacific strategy, as it were. It doesn't have Indo-Pacific policy for that matter. We talk about the Indo-Pacific. So we have a tendency to talk about things in multifarious ways without having a grand strategy behind it. So I think this is probably an opportunity, and this is the first time I'm actually attending a full-fledged I-IMEC conference. So I think this is an opportunity for us to take something back home. Thank you.
So, Richard, you guys should really be into this because I've always thought of Filipinos as kind of the Italians of Asia, right? So, like, Philippines, Italy, like that should be like a cool thing, right? Totally, right? So, over to you. And yeah, and please introduce yourself real quick, and then.
Yes. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Perfect. Yeah, Italians. We always make that joke too. Richard Haydar, and of course I teach at the University of the Philippines, but I'm also a journalist, vlogger, among other things. So we're as boisterous and dynamic as our Indian friends. And, you know, thank you, first of all, for having a Filipino on this panel. Usually whenever I'm in an international panel, they get the Singaporeans to do the Southeast Asia thing. And I always hear the same cliche, oh, you know, the big two elephants and the rest are grass. And I always felt that's very problematic because it's more like Lion King, right? Yeah, you got two big elephants, but you got also lions and you got zebras and all sorts of things. So if you really look at the picture in my part of the world, it's really 50 shades of hedging, right? The Indonesians are hedging it their ways. The Vietnamese are playing their game their own ways. And we Filipinos, we're a U.S. treaty ally. We have a fantastic relationship with not only the first, but also the second Trump administration. But we're also hedging. You know, it's not like we want to put all our eggs in one basket. So I think it's that complexity and that nuance and that common quest for strategic autonomy, which is very important. And that clearly has a geo-economic dimension. I mean, speaking of the Philippines, fortunately, unlike Indonesia, we're not like a big, invisible nation. I think the problem in Indonesia is that they're so big and at the same time invisible at the same time.
Largest invisible nation in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, but the Philippines, our problem is that we're always known for the wrong people. So all sorts of Imeldific people, and kind of our own Italian people. Like, you know, from the boisterous Duterte, who's there in the ICC detention, I visited the other month, to Imeldo Marcos, and the son is now in charge. You know, we were always like Asians, but we were also like Latinos. We were 300 years under the Espanol, and if not for you pesky gringos, we would have had our own independent state. But what makes the Philippines really exceptional, and I'm really proud of this, is we're also quote-unquote Western in terms of our belief in a rules-based international order. Definitely not a lousy democracy, but also, you know, we have our problems, we have our issues, we have our midterm elections as we speak right now, but we do believe in a rules-based international order, and I can proudly say, if you look at the entire Southeast Asian, no offense to Vietnam, we're the only ones standing up to China when it comes to the bullying in the South China Sea. You look at our transparency initiative. We don't have much of an army to speak of, but with the Coast Guard we have, thanks to the Japanese, Americans, French, we're giving the Chinese a good fight, right? But we don't want to be also the Pearl Harbor of Asia. We want an economic dimension there. That's why I really appreciated Senator Rubio back then, and now Secretary Rubio in his Senate hearing, saying that, you know, our problem with the Philippines is that we took them for granted. It's all about military and strategic. And now, finally, there's more focus on geoeconomics. And this is where things get interesting, because it's not only US and Philippines. Japan is a big part of that. Just the other week, I had a meeting with the visiting delegation from Prime Minister Ishiba's office in Manila, just as we had the massive Balikatan exercises. As you know, now we have this new trilateral, I call it JAFOS, so that it rhymes with AUKUS, Japan, Philippines, US trilateral. And a big dimension of that is not only Taiwan and security, but this what you call the Luzon Economic Corridor, $100 billion high-tech infrastructure-driven initiative where we're hoping to finally get the good kind of investments. I come from Baguio City, which was built by the Americans. We have Texas Instruments there for the past half a century. And I always wondered, why is the Philippines doing the mid-range packaging and design and we're not moving up? Taiwan is just barely 1 hour away. Taipei, Kaohsiung is like 40 minutes away from my town. So it makes perfect sense for the Philippines. I mean, we're not as big as India, but we could become this kind of a pivot state in the Pacific. And eventually what I really want to see is this kind of synchronicity when you bring together different projects from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, put them together. So, and the big idea that we're now focusing on is, you know, countries like the Philippines or in India, I don't know about Vietnam, but this idea of China-free supply chains, right? I have nothing against China, but I don't want them in my critical infrastructure. Right. I'd rather have Japanese, Korean, Indians or other friends. And I think that is where we have a lot of commonalities that we can build on. So was that, I don't know if that was Italian enough in terms of the vibrancy of that, but I think my advice always to my Japanese friends is be more Italian. Not in terms of the quality of infrastructure, but in terms of promotion of their projects. Because the last thing I want to say here is that people forget, China keeps on saying they have huge investments, but it's just empty pledges. I call it pledge trap. The biggest investor in the Philippines and much of Southeast Asia is Japan, except no one knows it. So I think the Italian part is where they have to a bit emphasize that more enough. And that's where I think we can push back against China in a constructive way and create that good competition.
Yeah, well, you talk with your hands, so that works.
Definitely.
So this panel has been, I think, really important because it illuminates the real value of I-IMEC. Right? Nobody here is going to build I-IMEC. Well, the Indians might kick in some bucks, but I-IMEC is not, as we said before, it is not an alternative to the Belt and Road. It is not somebody's road. I-IMEC is really an extension of the idea that Abe first introduced, of the idea of free and open spaces. That these is empowering the people in the path. So you're right in that the narrative of the elephants, fight that's the grass against Trump. It's a horrible analogy. First of all, countries are not grass; they have agency, their own things, and you don't want to be grass. You want to be the trees because elephants don't fight in the trees, right? So, so I want to phrase this question. Anybody can jump in, and you can do either one, because you actually said something I think that was really brilliant, which Indians often do. Which was, what is it? The real value of I-IMEC is going to be about creativity. So, what is the big creative thing that a country could extract and build on? And that's what I think what we really want everybody to be thinking about. Not how do you build a railroad. Somebody's going to build a railroad. But what is the big creative thing that's going to help advance your part of the world, deliver jobs or whatever? So that's one question. The other question, what do you see, having listened to everything today, what's the big obstacle? Not for building the railroad, somebody will figure that out, but what's the big obstacle for you in embracing the opportunity of I-MEC? So you can come at it from either direction, and anybody can start. Do you want to start?
Okay, thank you. Thank you again. Just to say something on the African visions. Since 2005, the Africa Union brings policymakers, state heads to discuss about this kind of connectivity in practice. One of the issue is the paperworks are not difficult, but the implementation are very serious and tough. And as an input, the Africa Union have developed the program for infrastructure development for Africa in 2012 and puts about 9 highways as a project, 40 key corridors, 90 ports, and 53 airports, which connecting from east to west to north to south of the continents, which can help I-IMEC to use this opportunity in Africa, align with the Africa Union visions of those connectivity plans, which supported by finance, by the African Development Bank and other partners who are already engaged in the intra-Africa trade arrangement system infrastructure, which is a very easy way for I-IMEC to connect Africa, which actually I-IMEC at first initial excluded Africa. I don't know why, but at the initial time, that means. So, but this is a great opportunity which is designed by the Africa Union, which Belt and Road initiatives or global gateways try to use as an opportunity. Even, so you know, almost all of you, the Africa Union and the EU global gateways have invested half of its budget to the African infrastructure, which is they plan tentatively $300 billion, and they plan to invest it in Africa, which is $150 billion, which mostly the African Union and its member countries are appreciative of that initiative. So I-IMEC should connect this and link these global gateways with European partners and with the African partner, which is the African Union and the African Development Bank. And, you know, Africa is building the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement since 2019, which is around 50 countries signed that agreement. And still, it's one of the big EU model of the Africa in history because it connects more than 54 countries in the intra-Africa trade arrangements. And any initiative which is proposed by the I-IMEC and other connectivity initiative should align with the existing Africa Union initiatives, unless it will be a bottleneck to implement it. Because they have their own priorities, they have their own agenda, and priority in sector even, in maybe road or railway, airports. So aligning and identifying the priorities of the country, which are the sector which is the priority, is very important to the implementation process of the I-IMEC, which one of that tradesman talks about, why we talk about these issues of Africa and other, because already the initiative is excluding. But integrating is very important because Africa is the future continent of the world, having many resources and minerals, and the Americans even try to have a the Angola corridor on the mineral connectivity, Lepoto corridor, or they have an initiative, Lobito corridor. They have a great initiative which is proposed by the American, connecting 3 countries. And now Trump is dealing with DRC, which is one of the richest country in Africa continent, but have its own internal problems. So sometimes perception management is very critical when it comes to Africa. So the Europe and other collective West should manage the perception towards Africa and cooperate and using the existing potential that the Africa should have. That will boost the global cooperation.
Anybody else? Opportunities around school?
Sure. Two quick things. One of them is the sort of technical creativity, and then I guess what you can call maybe the conceptual creativity. On the technical side, to finance it, there's lots of different pools of capital. There's lots of different financial instruments. Beyond the sovereign wealth funds that we talked about, beyond the possible green bonds and so forth, there are trust funds. They do exist. Dozens and dozens of multilateral, multi-donor trust funds exist, for example, within the apparatus of the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, obviously, based in Manila, so on and so forth. Just got to pick a thematic area. When I was working on community development with the World Bank in Indonesia, we had a pool of different donors, Switzerland, Denmark, USAID, and what was it? It was like Finland or something like that, all working on community development, village development, And if you pick a thematic area, you work with existing trust funds, those can really unlock a lot of value over the long term with multi-donor stakeholders. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, how can we not only lower costs, but also drop the amount of time it takes to move goods around the sub-region, for example? I was talking about the long amount of time to move goods from point A to point B within Indonesia and within the sub-region as well. Now, at the World Bank, my colleagues did a network efficiency analysis. What would it take to reduce the time to move goods from Sulawesi Island, which is shaped like a K, and Bitung, which is a port way up there on that top part of the K? How do we get goods from there up to the Northeast Asian countries like China and Philippines and Japan and so on and so forth? If you upgrade those ports to a transshipment hub, and a transshipment hub, of course, collects local points and brings goods there, it will drop the amount of time to move things to Northeast Asia, including our friends at the J end of the I-IMEC, drop it by 2 days, which is huge. So maybe I-IMEC is a chance to actually do those things that these studies and white papers and so on and so forth have proposed. And then finally, on the conceptual end, I really think that values are really important. This is not just mumbo jumbo. It's like, what in practice are we actually trying to reflect through an entire multi-country project like I-IMEC? Now, Belt and Road, their values are underpinned, very explicitly stated, it's on the website, the community of common destiny, which is a very Orwellian Beijing style thing where, we're going to recenter Beijing and so on and so forth. But if we look at other values, such as, for example, transparency, AIIB, which is under Beijing, for example, out of all the multilateral development banks, has the lowest amount of transparency in terms of board minutes and other documentation. If we increase that for I-IMEC, I think it would benefit everyone. There's other values we can look at too, including quality infrastructure. I was really appreciative of the Japanese infrastructure initiatives, which started off by declaring themselves as the Partnership for Quality Infrastructure in response to the Belt and Road Initiative, and also other values as well, such as just integrity and better cooperation. So if those values are reflected by an I-IMEC, which is new, it sets new standards and benchmarks, which are really, really important over the long term. And finally, I just ask all the sort of artists in the room or those connected to artists to really sort of, reflect and manifest this particular vision through the arts. The arts do reduce tensions within societies and between societies, and to communicate that, even through something that sounds very hard-nosed and technical, at the international level, will really, really get youth involved as well as sort of communicate this vision a lot better.
Thank you. I think you asked two questions. One is, sure. So, some big ideas about taking I-IMEC forward in some ways. I think there are three reasons, in my mind, conceptually speaking, why I-IMEC is unique and perhaps important. Number one, this is the age of minilateralism. This is the age of like-minded coalitions. In the age of deglobalization and failing multilateralism, you need like-minded countries to come together to uphold global commons, to cater to global commons, to cater to global governance, or regional governance for that matter. So I think regional connectivity is one of those commons, regional and global commons, that must be upheld and pursued by like-minded countries. So I think to that extent, we are filling a major vacuum internationally, conceptually speaking, number one. Number two, I think, as more and more economies rise, as more and more countries grow, we need more and more alternative routes. We need more and more alternative arrangements and mechanisms. World is growing, populations are growing. There will be more, markets, travel, people, etc. The future needs more of everything. There is no question about it. So, and trusted networks, like-minded coalitions. I can't sort of underline and emphasize that enough. If there is one value that is important, in a world that is anarchic, in a world that is chaotic, in a world that is unstable, that is that of trust. That's one value I think a lot of countries are going to look for. Like you said, we are not going to trade with China on sensitive technology. Same here. Why is that? It's because we don't trust the Chinese, precisely because of that. So I think trust is going to be one of those factors that will need to be taken seriously. The question that we should therefore ask is there enough trust among the I-IMEC partners? So let me come to the challenge part of it or the risk part of it. From my country's point of view, from our point of view, I think one of the problems is that clearly India is temperamentally a risk-averse country. This is not a country that is temperamentally risk-averse country. It's not a country that sort of takes strong decisions unless and until it is faced with a crisis. So I think there is that problem. The second one is on the China question too. I don't think the Indians would want to sort of pitch it or see it as an alternative to China. We are next door to China. We are the next door neighbor to China. If China wants to kick somebody, they're going to come after us. I mean, it's not a question of the Indians are scared of the Chinese from morning to evening, but there's a tension in the Indian mind in that sense. I want to sort of make one more point about the question of why this is perhaps a great idea, I-IMEC in that sense. Somebody said about the instability in the international system. I think from an Indian point of view, instability is not a bad idea. Instability is good in the international system because if there was no instability, nobody would have asked for our opinion, right? I mean, nobody would come to Delhi and ask, what do you think about the international order? Things are fine. The Europeans are handling the international order just fine. We don't need the Indians and the Indonesians and the Filipinos to sort of give us an opinion. Today, we are asked our opinion because there is instability in the international system. That fits into what you said, which is the sort of innovative coalitions. So instability provides possibility for creativity and creative coming together of like-minded coalitions. So I think there is that possibility too. But back to you.
Richard, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, very quickly, I was actually in Brussels last month and had conversation with folks at the European Commission, European Parliament, among others. I'm not sure people are aware. So EU right now is really gung-ho in finalizing free trade agreement with a couple of countries. And it looks like the Philippines seems to be the most promising one, followed by Indonesia, and Thailand is also in the mix. They wanted that to finalize for quite some time, but there's someone called Duterte who came in and complicated things. But with that guy somewhere else, I think we're going to move. So in that sense, the Philippines is going to be invested in direct trade with Europe. When it comes to the Middle East, just like Indians, we're all over the place, right? You can always find a Filipino. So if you talk to engineers, big companies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, you're going to find Filipinos there. So we have already that kind of connection there, and we want to double down that in terms of private cooperation. But, I think people also forget that next to India, the Philippines is the other business process outsourcing superpower. So in terms of services, tech and increasingly semiconductors will be involved. But I think the key thing, and this is the final thing I want to add here, is that we, Philippines and Southeast Asia and India, have to strengthen that relationship, because I-IMEC is really from India to Europe. But what about India and Southeast Asia? And I think that's the weak link that we have to build on. But I think all the momentum is coming in there in terms of multilateralism, geoeconomics, and politics coming together. That's why I felt synchronicity and bring all of these major initiatives to compete with China and provide more alternatives is almost inevitable. Yeah.
Right. So, Chris, somebody's got to let me know when we got to pull the plug here. But I wanted to bring you the conversation because among the many reasons why I really hate the term Global South, and I think it totally sucks, is so the Caucasus and Central Asia have many of the same challenges as other parts of the world, but they're not considered part of the Global South, so that we don't talk about them. But as somebody who really follows that part of the region and actually has similar challenges to what we just discussed here, I thought it'd be really interesting to say, what does the potential of I-IMEC mean for somebody who is in the middle corridor, which Kosh hates, apparently. He doesn't like that term. But anyway, but for the Caucasus and Central Asia, maybe you just share a thought.
Thank you, Jim, and also thank you for the invitation to come here. I'm connected with the Caspian Policy Center in Washington, D.C. We deal with the Trans-Caspian corridor primarily. We're trying to emphasize 3 Cs, cooperation, corridors, and connectivity in Central Asia and the Caucasus. It's a major alternative to routes through north. Somebody mentioned today north, middle, and south. When we say north corridor, it's the cargo that goes through Russia primarily, and the south is usually the transit through Iran. So what prompted this connectivity in Trans-Caspian to pick up? Example, last year we have 83% increase in the cargo traffic in Trans-Caspian corridor. It's a multimodal, similar to I-IMEC. There was a question, what will basically increase the engagement in I-IMEC? What prompted the Trans-Caspian connectivity to emerge was a big crisis in Ukraine, basically. And then the shippers, the business, started looking for alternatives. And not only that, the Central Asia, big resource of critical minerals that we are discussing now. And all of this resources, energy, and potential of trade is big impetus for Central Asia and the Caucasus. Another big issue in this region is that the countries are also getting connected to each other. We talk a lot about China-Europe trade or India-Europe trade. There's also trade in the region that the region has to get connected with each other. I was just in Samarkand, where EU hosted a large summit with Central Asian countries. And I saw that they committed about $13 billion in investing in Trans-Caspian connectivity. And majority of that connectivity is about connecting to countries with itself first, before having them connected with the global powers, basically. And I think instead of waiting on the big issues to be resolved and making them preconditions for further investments in that kind of spaces, it's rather important to try to create the conditions when a very big crisis happens, like what happened in Russia and Ukraine. The trade just started flowing because the port investments was made, the road investments have been made, and now it's becoming a viable corridor. So maybe just small addition to that with some similarities.
Great. Any other questions or hands? Good. You can hand the mic down to Kosh there, somebody. So what's really interesting is, one is the commonality of issues that they're facing in the Caucasus and Central Asia, as it's very similar to the kinds of issues we've been discussing here. But the other is my prediction is in the end, the Caucasus and Central Asia will link most effectively in the global economy through the corridor into the Black Sea, and that most of the future growth and trade with many of the countries here is going to be actually through that corridor. It's not going to be through like north-south trade. Kosh?
Thanks, Jim. One question over to our friend from Ethiopia. 2 points. One, how do you see Ethiopia's connectivity that you mentioned, the Africa Union 2050 vision, all the rest of it, through Somaliland with the MOU to Berbera? And that is the most direct relation and connection of Ethiopia to I-IMEC. So I would love to hear that from you. The flip side of it is something, I mean, I already blabbered too much, but one of the, it's a competition trying to keep up with you. So when people talk about what Africa and I-IMEC and all the rest of it, it's lost, that was mentioned by you, is that both Saudi Arabia and UAE are one of the biggest and most active growing players in Africa. So by definition, it's already bloody well connected. Whether some think tank hasn't come up with a way to patch this is a different issue, but it's working. So it'd be great to hear from you on that. And I'd love to hear from a Philippine perspective on how we can leverage the Philippines actually being the right geographical country on the north-south axis. So it is literally the country that engages with the Pacific Islands, with Japan, with Australia, and for all the reasons that you mentioned, it's kind of the appropriate anchor for I-IMEC in the Indo-Pacific, the second most invisible country after the first most invisible country of islands. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I do have a map to show how the connectivity is working, but it's somewhat blurred and I cannot show it to the screen. But the issue of connectivity from Ethiopia perspective, it is one of the foreign policy priority of the current government. It's a definite, because there is a serious shift on the foreign policy orientation, and including the Prime Minister assumption, philosophy, and his book on what he called Maddamer, is a vision, which is synergy or addition in English. So we have to integrate that. That's the assumption. So we have a connectivity plan to connect in any ways to the sea. That's a very important thing is that we yeah, we are a landlocked country. So I-IMEC also should consider landlocked countries rather than focusing on coastal status. That's my recommendation. Because, you know, when you think about Africa, particularly the Eastern Africa, it is, you think in mind that Ethiopia, which is the second largest population size and the largest territorially very big country, and a huge economy, and 70% use, which is the issue for migration and for the concern for Europe and other countries. But particularly, the issue of connectivity is from Kenya, South Sudan, to Addis and Djibouti. There is a huge project which is funded by the African Development Bank and the African Union, the Lamu project, which connecting the Kenya port to the Djibouti corridor through Ethiopia, which is the biggest connectivity project is. And in terms of this Saudi, UAE, and especially the GCC countries, as you know, Saudi is one of the biggest Arab countries who have more investment in Ethiopia, and UAE is now following it, especially on artificial intelligence and other economy sector. UAE is very interested and very highly cooperative and have a strong friendly partnership with the existing governments in Ethiopia. Very, very strong in partnership and friendship with UAE and Saudi. Because what was the assumption the Ethiopian government it wants to diversify its partnership rather than concentrating on a single partners. That's why we joined BRICS, with including with Saudi, UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt from Africa. Egypt and Ethiopia joined BRICS because that's the assumption. We need more partners and diversification, not to be suffocated through geopolitical economic competition, or sometimes as an instrument of punishment on foreign policy on as economic instrument. So I-IMEC should be seen as an alternative for the African continents, as an alternative rather than as a competing. It should be seen as an alternative options, because all African countries need the connectivity initiatives, and I-IMEC should have to see that from that perspective. So UAE, Saudi are very high investing, and India and China is also competing and investing in Ethiopia.
So, Rich, you get the last word.
It just, yeah, 1 minute. I mentioned the Philippines as a lynchpin state, precise because I mean it's like the same amount of hours it takes you to be in Tokyo, in Seoul, in Guam, right? And it's exactly in between the first, second, and increasingly the third island chain is also becoming important. So you have this perfect convergence of geoeconomic and geopolitical consideration. There's a reason why the Asian Development Bank was established in the Philippines in the 1960s. But we were like that kid who peaked too early, right? Got overexcited about everything. Oh, we're the new stars. And then we let go of all of the advantages we had. But now, because of the rise of China, all of these uncertainties, it's finally giving us that impetus and push to exercise a degree of strategic agency that I felt our incompetent, kind of Latin American style politicians didn't bother to do. But thanks to people like us, the new generation of thinkers and civil society folks, we're pushing the government to embrace that. And I'm seeing a lot of positive indications. So whether we want it or not, we are being pushed in the direction of exercising that strategic agency and leveraging that. So we can be the little India on the Pacific side and complement whatever I-IMEC is offering on the other side of the Indo-Pacific Ocean.
And everybody, please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you. Thank you.